Tonight on 2020, a shot in the dark. A verdict that could be just hours away as 6 women huddle in a jury room, deciding the fate of George Zimmerman.
Every child's worst nightmare to be followed on the way home in the dark.
This is the path where the lives of Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman collided that night.
The neighborhood watchdog on a collision course with a kid in a hoodie, Trayvon Martin.
He said, "You're gonna die tonight, mother."
Today, what got said in court, what everybody's thinking about.
This case is not about race. It's about right and wrong.
Some say it's black and white.
If he wasn't black, he wouldn't have followed him.
Is a racial powder keg about to explode?
We are not racist! We are not!
Countdown to a verdict. Plus, a wife who understands all too well because her husband was gunned down too.
I said, stop right now or I will shoot you.
You believe he could have just turned around and walked right back down that street?
Why didn't he go home?
The so-called neighborhood bully at the boiling point over a 3-year-old's birthday party, taking aim with a video camera and a gun.
If somebody messes with you, all you gotta say is you're in fear of your life, and you can kill that son of a bitch.
A shot in the dark. Here's Elizabeth Vargas and David Muir.
Good evening. Tonight, the fate of neighborhood watchman George Zimmerman is now in the hands of that jury. 6 women, the all-female jury, now given the case and sequestered until they decide his guilt or his innocence. If convicted of the highest charge, second-degree murder and the killing of Trayvon Martin, George Zimmerman could spend the rest of his life behind bars.
And in great part, that jury will be deciding his fate based on just a single word, the word help. And who was screaming it in the background of a chaotic 911 call. Here's Matt Gutman, who's been on the case in Florida since the story first broke.
Your verdict finding George Zimmerman either guilty or not guilty must be unanimous.
The jury has the case after a tense 3-week trial filled with courtroom fireworks.
He automatically assumed that Trayvon Martin was a criminal.
The impossibly long hours and short tempers.
I'm not physically able to keep up this pace.
Had even the judge storming out on the legal teams. Finally, there will be an answer to the burning question: why did George Zimmerman kill Trayvon Martin? Was it murder, manslaughter, or self-defense? The tale of how Martin and Zimmerman's paths fatally collided started here in Sanford, Florida, a small bedroom community on the fringe of the world's happiest city, Orlando. But it's a long way from the theme park crowds on a raw February night inside this gated Sanford community.
This guy looks like he's up to no good or he's on drugs or something.
That's the voice of George Zimmerman, and the guy he's talking about is Trayvon Martin, earlier seen buying an Arizona drink and Skittles at a 7-Eleven. Martin was heading back to his father's fiance's home in the housing complex where he was spending a 10-day school suspension after getting busted on a pot-related offense, something the jurors never heard. Despite his youthful indiscretions, his family says Martin was just a normal teenage kid into girls, rap music, and airplanes.
He was interested in flying planes. That fascinated him, which led him to go to a program to, try to pursue his career in aviation.
Is there one thing that you miss most about him?
I miss his smile. He was a very affectionate teenager, so I just miss him smiling and giving me a hug.
It's raining and he's just walking around looking about.
Initially, Martin didn't know he was being tailed by Zimmerman, self-appointed neighborhood watch captain. By day, an auditor. By night, Zimmerman, who had a past interest in law enforcement, kept a wary eye out on behalf of his neighbors.
What was your first impression of Zimmerman?
I thought he was meek and easygoing, and at first I had a little trepidation that this guy was going to be running a neighborhood watch.
How do you think he did as a neighborhood watchman?
Fantastic. His efforts and his diligence yielded results.
And that firearm.
But in court, prosecutors painted Zimmerman as an overzealous wannabe cop. His language in this non-emergency call to police helped spark the racial debate over the case.
He's got his hand in his waistband. Yeah, he's a black male.
And fueled allegations that he was aggressively profiling a harmless teenage student.
Just let me know if this guy does anything else. Okay. They always get away.
Punks. These they always get away. Those were the words in that grown man's mouth as he followed in the dark a 17-year-old boy.
The prosecution wants to make it clear that he already had a mindset when he got out of his car and began to follow Trayvon Martin.
Armed with a fully loaded semi-automatic pistol.
Prosecutors argue that Zimmerman was hell-bent on stalking Martin, even when told by police to call it off.
Are you following him? Yeah. Okay, we don't need you to do that. Okay.
And then Zimmerman hangs up. At that point, Martin is on the last phone call of his life with his friend, Rachel Chantel, and he's racked with worry about the strange man shadowing him.
You just told me the man looked creepy. And
he said the man looked creepy.
Creepy white. Okay. Excuse my language, cracker.
Chantel says she told Martin to run away, but then she says she heard him being confronted by Zimmerman.
Why are you following me for? And then I heard a hard breath man come and say, what you doing around here? And then I started hearing a little bit of Trayvon saying, get off, get off.
This is the path where the lives of Trayvon Martin and George Zimmerman collided that night. And out here for about 30 or 40 seconds, there was a black hole of information until dispatchers from 911 started getting flooded by calls from neighbors all around.
They're wrestling right in the back of my porch.
Someone's yelling 2 doors down from me, screaming, hollering, help, help, help.
Then a gunshot that shatters the night.
Oh my God, it's someone to be shot.
Oh my God. And there's a black guy down that looks like he's been shot and he's dead.
George Zimmerman did not shoot Trayvon Martin because he had to. He shot him for the worst of all reasons. Because he wanted to.
He said, yo, you got a problem?
But in this police reenactment, Zimmerman says it was he who was confronted by an angry Trayvon Martin.
And he said, you got a problem now. And then he was here, and he punched me in the face. He got on top of me somewhere around here. That's when I started screaming for help. I started screaming, help, help, as loud as I could. I tried to sit up, and that's when he grabbed me by the head and tried to slam my head down.
Zimmerman says the confrontation escalated after Martin spotted the gun on his hip.
He looked at it, and he said, you're gonna die tonight, motherfucker. And he reached for it, but he reached, like I felt his arm going down to my side, and I grabbed it, and I just grabbed my firearm, and I shot him. One time.
After you shot him, what did he say?
After I shot him, he like sat up, and he said, oh, you got me.
About 2 minutes after the shot rang out, this photo was taken at the scene. The defense says it confirms Zimmerman's account that he was attacked by Martin. And in court, even a neighbor called as a prosecution witness appeared to back up Zimmerman's account that he was the one being attacked.
I could tell the person on the bottom had a lighter-skinned color.
The jury has been presented with 2 completely contradictory accounts of what happened, with no solid evidence to back up either side's claims. That is, until a critical piece of evidence is introduced.
I'm gonna play the whole thing.
A 911 call where a voice is heard screaming for help.
There's just someone screaming outside. Do you think he's yelling help? Yes.
14 screams in 40 seconds. The critical question, does that desperate voice belong to Trayvon Martin or George Zimmerman?
If the jurors believe that it was George Zimmerman screaming out for help, then it supports his theory that he acted in self-defense.
I thought it was George.
To identify the voice, the defense calls a parade of Zimmerman's friends, who perhaps not surprisingly say it's him on the tape.
Do you know whose voice that is in the background screaming?
Yes, definitely. It's Georgie. I hear it. I hear him screaming.
There's absolutely no doubt in my mind that is George Zimmerman.
The mothers of both Martin and Zimmerman also take the stand, and they confidently identify the voice as that of their son.
Who do you recognize that to be, man?
Trayvon Benjamin Martin.
I'm sure that's George's voice.
Defense would call Tracy Martin, Your Honor.
But then the defense calls a more unlikely witness.
And nothing but the truth, so help you God.
I do.
Trayvon Martin's father, Tracy Martin. Police say Martin informed them just 2 days after the shooting that he did not believe the voice on the tape was his son's. But on the stand, Martin seems to change his story, saying that after hearing the tape over 20 times, he's now convinced it was his son crying for help.
I was listening to my son's
last cry for help. I was listening to his life being taken, and I was coming to grips that Trayvon was here no more.
I think at the end of the day, the testimony of these witnesses will cancel themselves out. The jurors are going to have to listen to that 911 tape, and they're going to have to decide for themselves who they believe that voice is.
And the only person who knows exactly what happened that night,
The defendant, George Zimmerman,
decided not to testify in his own defense.
After consulting with counsel, not to testify, Your Honor.
But the testimony of this woman, the so-called star witness, had everyone talking.
A lot of people criticized her for her hair, for her skin, for her darker skin tone.
And her answers raised an ugly taboo.
Justice for Trayvon!
Race.
We can't get justice for a young black boy!
To say this case is not about race is ignoring the pink elephant in the room.
Stay with us.
"2020 continues. Once again, Matt Gutman.
Rachel Jeantel was the state's star witness. She was supposed to spellbind the jury with details of her phone call with Trayvon Martin just moments before he was killed. Then she opened her mouth.
That's real retarded, sir. That's real retarded to do that, sir.
19 years old and just entering her senior year, Jeantel was pitted against savvy trial lawyers who kept her floundering on the witness stand for 7 hours.
Are you claiming in any way that you don't understand English?
I understand you. I understand you. I do understand English.
This was the moment that people were waiting for, to hear this star witness, if you will, and it turned out to be something very, very different. It ended up not being about Trayvon and ended up being more about her.
Jeantel was not only vilified, this professor says she was mammified.
Tell me what you mean by the mammification of Rachel Jeantel.
A lot of people came out and criticized her for her hair, for her dark skin, her darker skin tone, for being overweight.
And when she thought she was out, they brought her back in.
I think we should plan on at least a couple of hours.
What?
Excuse me, be quiet.
Most of what Jeantel was supposed to say got lost in how she said it.
At that point, did you know anything more about the case?
No.
Race surfaced again when Jeantel said Martin referred to George Zimmerman as a
creepy ass cracker.
Please sit down.
The defense team jumped on that, suggesting it was Martin who had done the profiling. With Jeantel, Race, a sideshow before, became the main attraction.
To say this case is not about race is ignoring the pink elephant in the room. This case is about race.
Shortly after the bullet left Zimmerman's gun, race became the flashpoint, but the wheels of justice in Sanford were turning at glacial speed.
We want arrest! Shot in the chest!
There was no arrest for 6 weeks.
No justice! No peace!
It divided Sanford and a nation.
If a black man had come into a white neighborhood and gunned down a 17-year-old boy, all hell would let loose.
Celebrities and average Joes alike pulled on the kind of hoodies Martin wore that night. It inspired the Million Hoodie March, 1,000 miles away from Sanford, high school walkouts, and so many protests. The message was being heard all the way to the White House.
You know, if I had a son, he'd look like Trayvon.
Knowing what I know today, if I were a DA, I would not have touched this case.
Christopher Darden, famous for prosecuting O.J. Simpson, knows firsthand how race can influence a murder trial.
Do you think that the issue of race could actually affect the way the jurors decide the verdict?
People say all the time, all around, everywhere I go, no, if he wasn't black, he wouldn't have followed him. If he wasn't black, he wouldn't have gotten out of his vehicle. If he wasn't black, he wouldn't have confronted him.
Okay, and this guy, is he white, black, or Hispanic? He looks black.
Zimmerman was only responding to a direct question from the police dispatcher, but those 3 words stung many.
Gracious God, our Heavenly Father, we lift up this case to you because you, Father God, know exactly what happened that night.
Here at the AME Allen Church in Sanford, churchgoers say publicly what many feel privately.
I can assure you unequivocally
If I, being a black man, had killed a 17-year-old white boy under the conditions that that boy was murdered, I've been in jail, probably doing time now. You know, I'm just calling it like it is.
About a third of Sanford's 54,000 residents are black. As the trial gripped their community, some church members began speaking out about an unholy topic.
Until we become honest about the divide that exists in this community, there will be no getting better.
Still, this little church dreamed big, the laundry list of prayers to be answered.
First thing we asked for was the arrest. Then we asked for the chief of police to be fired, and we did get an African-American black chief. That was our heart's desire.
Divine intervention? Perhaps, but it was the city manager's intervention that fired the old police chief and hired Cecil Smith.
Think you were hired because you're African American?
I think I was hired for my qualifications.
Smith will attempt to play top cop, mediator, and peacemaker all at the same time.
There's been essentially a separation between the two races for quite some time. And our goal right now, at least for police chief, is to try to bridge that gap.
Just yesterday, in closing arguments and speaking to the all-female jury, all but one of whom are white, prosecutor Bernie Della Rianda invoked Martin Luther King's I Have a Dream speech as he tried to do damage control on Rachel Gentile's testimony.
I had a dream that today a witness would be judged not on the color of her personality, but on the content of her testimony.
George Zimmerman, the man charged with second-degree murder of...
Folks in Sanford are well aware the nation is watching.
It turned out to a big week in the George Zimmerman trial.
The trial broadcast wall-to-wall on TV.
Is it a race case? Yes, because we've all interjected race into it. Those civil rights activists and the media. You helped to make this a race case.
At the most racially charged trial in memory, TV cameras have also spotted Shauna Lloyd. This 34-year-old African-American law student works for the defense as a law clerk, which means by extension, she works for George Zimmerman. The jaded will say she is nothing more than a legal prop.
You sit there every day, you look at George Zimmerman sitting right next to you. How do you feel about him?
I feel bad for George. I think it's very unfortunate that Trayvon Martin lost his life, because loss of life is always unfortunate. But I think that George is also fighting for a life that probably will never be the same, but it's still his.
Do you think of George Zimmerman as a topic differently than you think of George Zimmerman the person?
Absolutely.
Have other people asked you about her?
Yeah, some have asked, you know, is she there because of her race? And, you know, the answer is pretty easy, no.
Another example of the case that's all about race, despite the word rarely mentioned in court.
Racism has been the elephant in the room in the trial, but never overtly mentioned.
It's the sort of ultimate personification of how race plays itself out in our society today. You don't really know.
And you can't really put your finger on it.
But you feel it, right? If you're on the receiving end of that, you feel it.
Are you claiming in any way that you don't understand English?
The case is about to come to its conclusion. When it does, it's all hands on deck.
What percentage of your police force is going to be ready in anticipation of whatever happens?
Our entire police department.
Everybody.
There's no vacations, there's no furloughs.
Now, I don't know how you feel about it, but I'm telling you right now, Zimmerman is guilty. Whether you or the nation who's on his side don't like it, he's guilty.
And if, as many suspect, George Zimmerman is acquitted, he'll win his freedom, but he may not ever really be free.
I think he stays in hiding, but if I was him, I'm not sure that I would take the chance of walking down the street.
And so tonight, how much do you think race will impact the jury's final decision? Deliberating now. Let us know. Use the hashtag ABC2020, and we'll be right back.
Next, the city of Sanford, gripped by fear, death threats, anonymous phone calls, and their mayor, whose family is a target.
He looks absolutely terrified.
Chaos and casualties, even before the verdict. Coming up. 2020 continues with a shot in the dark.
More than 2 weeks of testimony, 56 witnesses, hundreds of pieces of evidence. But only one man knows exactly what happened the night Trayvon Martin was killed. And today, in closing arguments, his lawyer called him a victim.
You know, there was some anger and hostility and ill will and spite maybe that night. it just had nothing to do with George Zimmerman. Well, that's not true. It had something to do with George Zimmerman. He was the victim of it.
Defense attorney Mark O'Mara implored the jury not to assume anything or make snap judgments and laid the burden of proof squarely at the feet of the prosecution.
Give me a shred of evidence that contradicts that he had any other option.
Sabrina Fulton couldn't take it, leaving the courtroom as pictures of her dead son played one last time for the jury. 6 women, 5 of them mothers.
Isn't that every child's worst nightmare? To be followed on the way home in the dark?
And lawyers for the state of Florida tried to depict George Zimmerman as a man who had choices and made a deadly one.
Trayvon Martin may not have the defendant's blood on his hands, but George Zimmerman will forever have Trayvon Martin's blood on his.
2 lives forever changed.
Your verdict is not going to bring Trayvon Benjamin Martin back to life. Your verdict is not going to change the past, but it will forever define it.
And as the nation is about to turn its attention away from this tiny community, one person is left to pick up the pieces.
A guy lost his life. Another guy shot him. When you pull that trigger, no matter what's going on, your life has changed. Whether you go to jail or don't go to jail, your life is totally, totally different.
Sanford Mayor Jeff Triplett says there's no going back. Still, he's preserved every moment of this tragedy.
I mean, this is really like a little sliver of history.
It's a scrapbook of a city turned upside down. Faded clippings of memories still fresh.
Son looks terrified there.
He looks absolutely terrified as to what's happening. And
We want arrest.
the innocence of the children watching all this and trying to understand what's going on.
Here in Sanford, being mayor is only a part-time job, but keeping the city safe amid nasty emails, anonymous phone calls, even death threats became a full-time occupation.
It was a lot of pressure, and I don't care if you're the mayor of New York City or the mayor of Sanford, Florida. There's no way you can truly be prepared for it.
Whereas Trayvon Martin lost his life, others lost their livelihoods. Police Chief Bill Lee, a 30-year veteran, was fired.
He's a good man. For me, it wasn't what the investigation was. It was the handling afterwards, the chaos management, so to speak.
He didn't take the candy, he took the life and left the child.
Lee is shouted down during a press conference weeks after the shooting. He marches away as I try to talk to him. I understand your frustration, but
I thought for the good of the community, and particularly for the good of the Sanford Police Department, we needed to move forward.
But Lee wasn't the only cop casualty. Once a star detective, lead homicide investigator Chris Serino was banished to the graveyard shift, night patrol. On day 6 of the trial, Serino was called by the prosecution, but ironically ended up helping the defense, saying George Zimmerman was believable.
His statement, what did that indicate to you?
Either he was telling the truth, or he was a complete pathological liar. One of the two.
Okay.
And then there's the police department spokesman, David Morgenstern, silenced as well.
Morgenstern, the PIO?
Morgenstern's still sergeant on the police department.
But no longer the public information officer?
No, he is right now on workers' comp, so he's on light duty.
Okay.
But the public remains rattled, especially in the sleepy development where neighbors are still defending George Zimmerman.
Matt, he had these.
They may have fought, but he has just the same right
Matty.
For self-defense as George Zimmerman did.
He had these, okay?
You'll never convince Frank Taffy that George Zimmerman did anything wrong that night.
16 months ago, you'd never been on TV. Now you're on TV 3 times a day.
Everybody has 15 minutes of fame. Mine's on a loop, Matt.
But fame has had its price, especially for those who never asked for it.
You have Jonathan Good that actually saw the fight. You have Jeremy and Jenna who made the 911 calls. You got the Manolos. You got Selma. You have Celine. You have Serdaika. All these people are casualties of this tragedy.
And then there's another resident, George Zimmerman, tonight awaiting a verdict
How does one plan for that?
I think you do the best you can to spend time with the loved ones, because you may never hug them or see them or be able to walk down the street with them again.
Lives destroyed, careers ended, a city ripped apart by the greatest casualty of all, the death of 17-year-old Trayvon Martin. Jeff Triplett, the mayor, now more of a custodian, trying to piece a broken city back together.
You apologize and you try to make things better. You know, that's all you can do is try to, you can't change the past. You cannot change it, but by God, you can walk through it and try to make it better.
If you were in that jury room right now, would you convict or acquit George Zimmerman? Let us know on Twitter using the hashtag ABC2020. We'll be right back.
Next, a kids' karaoke party that turned into chaos, all caught on tape.
I said, stop right now or I will shoot you. I'm in fear for my life. Get away from me.
He says they threatened his life. But what does the dead man's wife say?
When you hear him saying he fears for his life, is that rehearsed or is that real?
Very much rehearsed.
Another Zimmerman when we come back.
In the Trayvon Martin case, George Zimmerman claims it is self-defense, that he feared for his life. And tonight, 1,000 miles away, a very similar case, a shot in the dark by a neighbor who claimed his life was in danger too. But with one big difference. There was a videotape rolling on the entire thing, 22 minutes. Tonight here, you'll see it for yourself, and you can decide, was this self-defense or a man who wanted to pull the trigger? Like so many across America, Mindy Danaher has been watching the George Zimmerman trial closely.
The only two people that really know truly what happened are those two people.
But Mindy is watching because she's still living the horror of a case that also hinged on self-defense. Her husband, a school teacher and young father, was killed in an instant. And the gunman argued that he too feared for his life and pulled that trigger.
Make you think right back to your own case.
Unbelievable.
2 years before George Zimmerman would shoot Trayvon Martin, Mindy Danaher's nightmare had already begun. In a small town, Huffman, Texas, where she lived with her husband, Kelly, and their little girl, Perry. It was a Saturday evening, May 2010, a celebration with cupcakes and candles marking 2 birthdays, Mom's and their little daughter's 2.
Both celebrating birthdays. She was turning 3.
3.
And it was a good afternoon.
It was an awesome day. It was really fun. So many people were there we haven't seen in forever.
As it got late, there was some drinking and karaoke. And according to neighbors, Raul and his wife, Donna Rodriguez, the birthday party becomes a neighborhood nuisance.
Won't y'all turn that down?
My husband had called the constable's office to ask him to come and have him turn it down because it was so loud.
The police come and go, but the karaoke continues past midnight. And with every new song, Rodriguez grows angrier.
Stupid idiots. Jesus, these people are stupid and they're drunk.
Neighbors knew that night trouble was brewing.
Ken, my fiance, came and woke me up and said that I think there may be trouble fixing to happen. I just saw Raul leave his house and he's walking down the street.
It's a little after midnight.
That's the voice of Raul Rodriguez, still speed dialing police. But he now has more than a phone in his hand. He has a video camera. He's recording the whole thing. And he's marching toward the Danaher's home. And on his hip, a handgun and 28 rounds of ammunition.
I wish these cops would hurry up and come out here. These people are drunk.
Rodriguez first encounters Mindy's dad, James Storm.
Won't y'all turn that down, please?
Hey, well, who are you?
I live over here. Turn it down.
Hey, don't go hollering at me.
I'm hollering because you can't hear me. I told y'all repeatedly to turn it down.
I hear you screaming.
Well, why don't y'all turn that garbage down, please? Some of us are trying to sleep.
Then Mindy's husband, Kelly Danaher, appears out of the darkness with others from the party. And Rodriguez pulls that gun.
Don't come any closer, please.
I'm telling you,
stop. I said stop right now or I will shoot you. Stop! Get back! Get back! I'm in fear for my life. Get away from me! Get away from me!
You pulled a gun on me?
Yeah, I told you to stop. My life's in danger. You got weapons on you.
Danaher's friend, Jamie Tyler, right there.
He was asking, what are you doing down here? What's the problem? What are you doing down here? And then he threw his hands in the air and he backed up
immediately.
Tyler and the others call 911.
There's a guy in the street with a gun. All right. Pointing at us.
Rodriguez, still recording with his video camera, puts his gun back in his holster, and he calls police too.
I've got about 15 people here. They wanted to kick my ass and they wanted to beat me down. I had to draw my weapon to stop them, to keep from coming to me. I felt my life was in danger. I drew my weapon and then they stopped.
Rodriguez says he's scared and his life is in danger, yet he doesn't try to leave.
You believe he could have just turned around and walked right back down that street?
Why didn't he go home? I mean, most normal people would have just went home.
Okay, they're going to escalate this. Okay, look, I'm going to have to defend myself. I'm going to have to defend myself. I'm going to have to defend myself.
Then comes the moment everyone would regret. Kelly Danaher's friend Ricky Johnson moves toward that neighbor, already boiling mad.
Laughing at him, approaching him, like being silly or goofy to the camera.
That's when the shooting begins.
Look, I'm not reasoning with these people anymore. I'm just going to tell them to stay back when they come. They're drunk, they're swearing.
Rodriguez shoots Ricky Johnson in the stomach. Mindy's husband Kelly and the others then rush in.
Marshall Stetson is shot, and then Kelly Danaher at some point is shot also.
Harris County 911. No, there's gunshots being fired.
He's quickly shooting off his gun. There's 3 people dead. There's so many people shot here.
3 shots from Rodriguez, 3 men down. Johnson and Stetson are wounded. They survive. But steps away from the party celebrating his wife and daughter's birthdays, 36-year-old Kelly Danaher is on the ground, bleeding to death. His friend Jamie Tyler holding his hand and listening to his final words.
I was holding pressure on his arm and talking to him and holding his hand, just telling him that help was on the way. And he just, he talked back and forth to me a little bit and was telling me that it hurt, and he just faded away, let go.
It was just moments earlier, Mindy and her daughter were celebrating, blowing out candles. Her family telling a young mother and wife to make a wish.
And I said, I don't need to make a wish. I have everything I need.
At that moment, you thought you had it all.
I miss him a lot still.
What do you miss the most?
Watching him with Perry.
Then suddenly, her husband gone. Deputies arrest Rodriguez and put him in jail, but he's confident he'll beat the charges because of one thing captured on his own videotape. When we come back, you'll hear it for yourself, and you'll hear from neighbors on that street one by one, revealing the secret life of the gunman. Could it change everything?
As soon as he stepped foot out that house, he made a choice on what he was going to do that night, and he did it.
2020 continues. Once again, David Muir.
4 months after George Zimmerman shot and killed Trayvon Martin in self-defense, he says, Raul Rodriguez going on trial in Texas for murder, saying he too feared for his life.
This man is guilty of murder. Not one thing that he did out there that night was self-defense.
His lawyers also claiming self-defense.
I guess the state's theory is that somehow Raul Rodriguez went next door because he wanted to kill somebody.
Rodriguez may have had good reason to believe the law would be on his side. Like Florida, Texas law allows you to stand your ground and does not require citizens to retreat from trouble or using deadly force.
And anybody that knows the law would have thought that they had the right, under those circumstances, to stand their ground.
Rodriguez says he followed the law, but what he and his lawyers call justified, prosecutors call murder.
This was not a case where Raul Rodriguez was standing his ground, but where a neighborhood bully was approaching unarmed individuals and looking for a reason and a circumstance where he could shoot his gun.
It wasn't murder. I mean, I had to defend myself.
Rodriguez says he simply went to the end of the Danaher's driveway at midnight because their karaoke singing was too loud. And that the next thing he knew, as he told that police dispatcher, was that a drunken mob was threatening his life.
Look, I'm in fear for my life now. I'm in very. That's why I drew my weapon. I'm in fear for my life. Please help me now. I brought my video camera because I really believed that if I had documentation of this, that we could take this to court.
He also brought that handgun and 28 rounds of ammunition.
Yes, I had a concealed handgun license, and it was perfectly legal for me to carry that weapon. I carried a firearm everywhere I went.
Rodriguez says he first pulled his gun on Kelly Danaher and the other men at that birthday party only after Danaher came toward him.
I'm telling you, stop. I said, stop right now or I will shoot you. I said, if you don't stop right now, I'll shoot. And so he, whoa, hey, whoa. And so he backs up.
Rodriguez put his gun away, but drew it a second time when he says one of Danaher's friends, Ricky Johnson, came toward him.
I thought to myself, this guy's going to kill me. And I seen the look in his eyes and just hatred. And I seen him pull a weapon, and just as he was doing that, he started to cackle. And I brought it to bear like this. And that's when I grabbed my weapon and I fired.
Rodriguez shoots Ricky Johnson, and then he says Kelly Danaher, the father throwing that birthday party, rushed him along with others, and he shot them too.
And Kelly Danaher, he comes running at me with everything he's got, and I seen an object in his hand too, looked like a knife. And it's just like this, running at me. Look what you did, motherfucker. Look what you did, motherfucker. I'm gonna kill you. And I was, no, stop, no, pow, pow.
He claimed he was in danger that night. Was he in danger?
No. None of those guys are fighters. They were telling him to go home.
In court, prosecutors argue this is hardly a man who was reluctant to shoot.
On that particular day, he didn't have glasses on. He wasn't wearing a suit. He had guns strapped on him like Gunsmoke. I am the law in these here parts. This is my neighborhood.
And then neighbors from that street take the stand, one by one, describing the man who they say tried to rule their neighborhood.
I label him like the schoolyard bully. He always had a problem with somebody.
Oh, he thought he ran this neighborhood. The neighbors actually would alter their lifestyle to appease this man.
But no testimony, no evidence speaks louder to the jury than the 22-minute video Raul Rodriguez took himself. There's Kelly Danaher, his hand on his heart in the final moments of his life. The video, a first-hand view of what unfolded that night, unlike the Zimmerman case where jurors must now imagine it for themselves. In the Rodriguez case, he thought his video would clear him.
Look, I'm not losing to these people anymore. I'm just going to tell them to stay back. They're drunk, they're slurring.
Who on earth in the history of the world takes a video camera to tape themselves when they think they're going to murder somebody?
His attorneys argue Rodriguez was afraid of Kelly Danaher that night.
He has the right to pull a weapon if he feels like he's in fear of his life. This guy was not going up to Raul to shake his hand or pat him on the back. In Raul's mind, he was going up there to whip his ass.
Rodriguez had a concealed handgun license and knew all about the Texas Stand Your Ground law, allowing for deadly force if you're in fear.
I'm in fear for my life.
But those words, I'm in fear for my life, would be the most damning part of the video, prosecutors say, because Rodriguez keeps repeating them. They believe not because he's truly scared, but to cover himself.
Look, I'm in fear for my life now. I'm in fear for my life. Well, I was in fear for my life. I'm in fear for my life.
When you hear that video and you hear him saying he fears for his life, is that rehearsed or is that real?
Very much rehearsed.
You think he knew that that law would protect him if he just said that?
Yeah, yes. Most definitely.
Part of his plan.
Part of his plan. He was going to do it to somebody.
He thought those buzzwords, the parroting of the statute, would save him.
What we have to know about this case, ladies and gentlemen, is that to this man, those words are rhetoric.